Welcome to The Explainer. I'm so glad you're here today. Have you ever noticed how some people just effortlessly command a conversation? They make everyone around them feel heard, engaged, and totally at ease. It feels like magic, right? Well, it's not. Everyday conversations, the really good ones anyway, are actually structured exactly like a hit talk show. Today, we're going to unpack the mechanics of effective communication and help you level up into a master conversationalist. So grab a notebook, because we're treating this like a real masterclass in human connection.
Here's a quick look at our roadmap for today. 1. The communication blueprint. 2. Choosing your topic. 3. Strategies for smooth conversations. 4. The power of politeness. 5. The talk show test. And 6. Final takeaways. Let's just jump right in.
Section 1. The communication blueprint. Setting the stage for success.
So, I want to ask you this directly. What makes a conversation truly connect? Think back to the absolute best conversation you've had this week. What made it work? Was it the topic, the person, or was there this invisible rhythm to how you both spoke? Just sit with that for a second. Hold on to that thought as we start unpacking the mechanics here.
The big secret here is that every great conversation relies on behind-the-scenes structure. Whether you're playing the host, the one guiding the interaction, or the guest who's sharing their experiences, it's this structure that keeps things from getting super awkward or just completely falling apart. Don't think of it as some rigid, memorized script. It's more like the tracks that keep a train from going off the rails. It gives everyone a safe, predictable space to operate in. It's a highly collaborative, adaptive process, and it takes mutual effort and emotional reciprocity to keep that train moving smoothly forward.
All right, Section 2. Choosing your topic. What are we talking about?
What's really fascinating here is how clearly we can divide our conversational subjects into two totally distinct buckets. Over on the left, we've got personal topics. These are internal, they're vulnerable, and very self-focused. We're talking self-awareness, personal values, mental health, self-care. Like, imagine you're venting to a friend about just being totally burned out. You mostly need them to listen and validate, right? Now look on the right, we have interpersonal topics. These are much more collaborative and focused on relationship building. Think conflict resolution, teamwork, leadership, networking. An example here would be brainstorming a new marketing campaign with a coworker. That requires a really active, dynamic back and forth. Knowing which bucket you're in is step 1 in mastering this talk show playbook.
And here's exactly why pinning down your topic actually matters. Knowing your category helps you gauge the required emotional reciprocity and the trust building you'll need. A pro talk show host will completely shift their whole approach depending on the topic. Think about it. If a guest is sharing a deeply personal, sensitive mental health journey, the host slows down, right? They lean in, their voice gets a bit softer, and they offer deep empathy and quiet space. But switch that up to an interpersonal topic, maybe they're discussing a killer new networking strategy for entrepreneurs, and boom, the energy changes completely. The pace is way faster, the tone is upbeat, and the dynamic is super collaborative and solution-oriented. Basically, you've got to match the vibe to the topic.
Moving right along to Section 3, Strategies for Smooth Conversations, the Tools of the Trade.
Let's hit the formal definition first. Conversation strategies are the techniques or tactics used by speakers to manage, maintain, and negotiate interactions effectively during communication. Okay, in plain English, this just means the specific tools you use to make sure a conversation feels like a really good, engaging game of tennis, rather than two people just hitting tennis balls into an empty abyss. So think of these 5 steps as your everyday conversational toolkit. We really need to unpack these because this is where the actual magic happens. Number 1, turn-taking. This is just knowing when to speak and, critically, when to graciously yield the floor so the other person can shine. Number 2 is clarifying, and wow, this one is powerful. When you paraphrase what someone just said, you're giving them absolute proof that you're listening, which is incredibly validating. Number 3, asking for repetition. Honestly, a lot of people are scared to do this, but asking someone to repeat themselves if you miss something will totally save you from making awkward, completely wrong assumptions later on. Number 4 is the delicate art of agreeing or disagreeing politely. Think of these as your conversational shock absorbers. They keep the ride smooth even when opinions clash. And finally, number 5, giving feedback. This just means dropping in those little verbal nods, saying I see or wow or exactly, just to show the speaker you're still totally dialed into their story. Let me give you a super practical, real-world example of turn-taking in action. Picture a really heated, chaotic group discussion. Everyone's talking over each other, and then suddenly someone steps in and just says, "Let's hear him out first." That one simple phrase is an absolutely brilliant conversation management signal. It establishes control, it shows respect to the speaker, and it instantly organizes the flow of communication. Have you ever been the person to step up and say that? Or maybe you wished someone had done it for you in a messy meeting? When you do that, that's you acting as the conversational host, stepping right up to direct the traffic.
That brings us to Section 4, the power of politeness, maintaining the vibe.
Okay, so we've got our tools, but politeness markers are the actual conversational glue. They show empathy and they keep the whole dialogue flowing smoothly. Just like a great host works the stage to make their guest feel totally comfortable and psychologically safe, your use of politeness markers, like just saying please, thank you, or softening a disagreement with I totally see your point, but that manages the emotional safety of the entire interaction. Because without this glue, you're not actually having a discussion, you're just having a really polite argument, or worse, a super awkward staring contest. Politeness is literally what builds the trust you need for meaningful relationships.
Section 5. The talk show test. Applying the playbook.
Now, take a really close look at this conversation mapping web. This is basically your master blueprint for how all these concepts actually interact in real time. Right in the center there, we've got our nominated topic. Notice how it acts as the anchor for everything else. Over on one side, we have the host, and on the other, the guest. And look at the branches coming off of both of them. They both have pathways for key points shared and politeness markers used. This brilliantly illustrates the reality that communication is never just a one-way street. Both parties are actively participating. They're both generating points. They're both using politeness to maintain that bridge between them, and they're constantly, continuously negotiating that central topic.
To actually play these roles effectively, you have to tap into completely different mental skill sets, or what we call multiple intelligences. The host leans really heavily on logical mathematical intelligence. Now that sounds super complicated, but honestly, it just means they're playing mental chess. They're figuring out where the conversation goes next, managing the structure, keeping an eye on the clock, all while using interpersonal intelligence to read the room. The guest, on the flip side, leans on intrapersonal intelligence. That's basically their internal emotional radar, used to sort through their personal views. And then they use verbal linguistic intelligence to actually communicate their story clearly and persuasively back to the host.
Let's see this in action by comparing the traits of effective versus failed communication. In a really good interview, or even just a deep conversation with a good friend, you're going to see smooth turn-taking, clear topic nomination so everyone knows exactly what we're actually talking about, and a high use of politeness markers. Now, look at a failed interaction. It is just packed with constant interruptions and a total lack of empathy. I mean, imagine sharing a deeply personal, vulnerable struggle with someone, and they immediately respond with, "Wow, that's crazy. Anyway, did you see the game last night?" Ouch, right? That is a jarring, awkward topic shift. It's a total failure of empathy, a failure of topic nomination, and a failure of politeness, all wrapped up into one. When you ignore these strategies, the whole talk show just crashes and burns.
And finally, Section 6. Final takeaways, your exit ticket. We've covered a lot of ground in our masterclass today, so let's lock in this structured summary. First up, always identify your topic. You need to know clearly whether you're navigating a personal, internal space or a collaborative, interpersonal one. Second, deliberately deploy your conversation strategies like active turn-taking and clarifying to manage the flow of the chat. Third, use those politeness markers constantly. That is how you build trust and establish emotional reciprocity. And lastly, try approaching your daily interactions with the structural mindset of a talk show host mapping out their next great episode.
I want to leave you with this final provocative thought. What strategy are you going to use in your very next conversation? Seriously, think about it. Will you be a little more mindful of your turn-taking? Will you deliberately paraphrase someone's point just to make them feel truly heard? Here's your homework for today. Take these tools out into the real world. Pick just one strategy and watch how your next interaction completely transforms. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer, and keep on learning.